Okay, well, welcome everyone. I still see we have some people joining, and I'm sure we will continue to have some stragglers. My name is Kate Brower. I am the Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Officer here at Dentons. For those who are just joining and didn't already hear, I'm joining you today from London for this fantastic conversation with Bindu Cudjoe, who will wave at you. Hopefully everybody can see Bindu near the top of their screen. Bindu is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, Chief Inclusion and Equity Officer, and Corporate Secretary for Laurentian Bank of Canada. So welcome, Bindu. It's great to have you with us. And the other person that you'll be hearing from today, a familiar face to our WOW attendees, is Romana Bruder-Schwab. Romana is our Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Manager. I am delighted to say that Romana and I unusually are sitting in the same space today in the London office. We will try not to speak over each other because we know if we do, we will suffer from some feedback. But Romana is going to help us out today by being active in our chat together with Natalie and Neve, I know, and also being our pollster, as we will have some polls for all of you in the discussion. So with that, welcome again. Welcome to you, Bindu. Really excited for this conversation. I know I just, spat out your title, and I hope that we'll learn more about you as we move through the conversation today. What I really want to start with, Bindu, you and I know each other exceedingly well, but many of our attendees don't know you. I suspect there are many here who do know you. But I just want to start with really, I'll say at the beginning, I'm not saying birth, but, maybe a little later. And a question that we ask all of our guests, because we know our audience is really interested, really starting with, how did you start out in a legal career? Let's start there. And I know you've got lots of other titles, and we'll get into that as we go. But, how did you get into the law?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and Kate and the Dentons team for this really very appreciated invitation to be part of this conversation. I will start. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, which is on the west side of Canada for those who are global, and grew up with immigrant parents. And if you have South Asian parents, you know that there is a hierarchy of preferred professions, which starts with doctor and then is preceded, and lawyer was at the time, and when I was growing up, nowhere on that list. But I really didn't do great in math or science. And so for me, law might have been the place. I also was deeply influenced by a television show that I thought sounded really cool, LA Law, because I'm now going to date myself. And so I thought law was a great career for me to pursue. I did an undergrad in business. And then after that, I decided I would go to law school, or I was lucky enough to get into law school and moved out to Toronto to do that. And I had no idea what I was getting into. No lawyers in my family, no idea what lawyers did. The TV version of it all, which was not courtroom, but like the TV version was really different than what the study of law was. And then later in my early years, especially the practice of law. So it was a very uninformed decision, purely fueled by, I need to be a professional for everything that my parents have sacrificed for me to be here. And I'm usually pretty good at talking, so I guess it felt like a natural fit. And maybe if I had known how grindy the practice of law could be in the beginning, I might not have been so attracted to it. But I think what attracted me to it was the thought of helping people and getting an opportunity to work with them, sometimes in hard things and sometimes in good things, but bringing people along and having some expertise. So I will say it was important for me to feel like I was the master of something. And so, those early years of my practice, which were in private practice, I'm a secured lending lawyer by training. We're all about, working on transactions, working on deals. I had the pleasure of working in big firms and having lots of different lawyers to work with and learn from, and learn to not want to work like, and learned a lot about the practice there. but just as importantly, learned about the business of law, because I think sometimes as lawyers, we get caught up in the law, in the cases, but you don't really appreciate what your economic value is or your impact is. And so I think that interest combined with, feeling like I wanted to do some different things outside of simply advising clients on the law, transacting like transactions, documenting things. That's where I decided to make a shift to in-house, and did that 12 years ago. But I was kind of unimaginative with that because I was a banking lawyer. And so I decided to go work for a bank. But I had no idea what in-house practice was like at a bank. I just knew that, I probably had some expertise that would be somewhat relevant. And at the time, I had some friends who were working at Bank of Montreal, and they were talking about this new general counsel who was like shaking things up and doing things interestingly, and was talking about diversity and inclusion as it then was, because this was 12 years ago. We just talked about having representation, not necessarily inclusion or equity. And so I decided to make the leap. And my plan B was, if I really suck at this whole in-house thing, I would, photocopy the employee directory and go back to private practice. And hopefully somebody would take me. But I joined BMO in 2012. And had a job that was less specialized than the work that I had been doing, and that was fun. Like, I kind of loved getting this opportunity to get really close with my clients as I first thought about them, but then later really shifted my thinking to think about them as my colleagues, and to really get to be part of, decision making and advising my colleagues about like what I thought, sometimes from a legal perspective, but sometimes otherwise, right? What's a good business practice, and what would be a great, what would be sort of interesting to do. And then I just really, for me, was so lucky, and had amazing opportunities at BMO, Bank of Montreal, and had a variety of different roles, for, I think, in 6 years. So either I was really terrible at all of them and I just got bumped into another one, or maybe I was okay at it, but quickly found myself really stretching way outside of the law. So, a couple of successively more like people leadership kind of roles of legal teams. And then I moved into what really changed my professional trajectory, I think, which was the chief administrative officer role. And so I stepped out of a legal advisory role and rather took over an operations role, and was responsible for, helping set the strategy of our department. So that was the legal compliance and investigations team, which at the time was about 800 people at BMO, and working on strategy and dealing with HR and organizational issues. And the real estate, like if somebody didn't like their desk or their carpet, that would come to my team, and communications and events, and really, and the finances of the team, right? What was our budget? How are we spending against it? And so again, a whole bunch of things that I didn't feel like I knew very much about, but sort of trial by fire, and dove into it, and then really started to see what an incredible opportunity this was to work with professionals who were experts in their spaces, but not necessarily mine, and how I could bring my training and enthusiasm and stuff to this. And so did that, and I probably going on way too long, but
No, it's okay. Well, I'm gonna stop you because
okay.
you're saying so many awesome things, and I have lots of questions. First of all, you are being far too self-deprecating. And for those of you who know Bindu, and I know there'll be many on the line, there's no way it's that she wasn't any good at any of those 4 jobs. It was because she was so excellent at them that she was moved around. But you did, you mentioned this new general counsel, and I mean, we all know who it is. Well, I know who it is. I have the privilege of knowing Simon Fish as well. He was the general counsel, I know, when you were Bank of Montreal, when you joined.
Yeah.
And it really brings me to something that I wanted to talk about. And we're totally jumping around, and we're going to hear more about your career journey, because of course
Sure.
you're not at Bank of Montreal now, and you've done things subsequent. But one of the things that I certainly know about that general counsel is, his commitment to being a really good mentor and sponsor. We don't have to talk about him specifically, but I just wanted to take a pause for a moment and ask you about that and the importance of mentors and sponsors in your career, because you've talked about how you got into in-house, but then you kind of got on this trajectory. You talked about these 4 wonderful roles, but I know that was a big part of it for you, and it'd be great to hear your reflections on that and on those topics.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk about that because, you can be excellent and you can work really hard, but it is always about the people you have around you, and whether those are your colleagues or whether they're mentors or sponsors. I think they're really critical to try to cultivate kind of a network of that to sort of support you, and as you're thinking about your choices and then also maybe making changes. So for me, I think the power of that mentorship, and well, in that case, he was my manager, but well, first of all, to take the leap to sort of put me into the chief administrative officer role was one where, if I thought about it, I didn't feel like I was experienced enough, that I had the qualifications for this job. And his encouragement to say, well, like, listen, you're a mother of 3. You probably know how to manage a lot of the things that I want you to be responsible for. And by the way, you don't have to be the expert in this. You are lucky enough to have a team that can do this. And let's try it out. Put your passion into it, see how it goes. And that kind of confidence, when I didn't necessarily have the confidence in myself, was really imperative to kind of give me courage to keep going. I didn't get it all right. Absolutely. I stubbed my toe, and I see some names on the screen that I recognize from my days at BMO, and they probably can attest that not everything went as exactly as planned, but there was great learning from that too, right? That you can do things, you can advance things, you can try things, and maybe it won't be what sticks, maybe it won't be what you love, but to keep having courage to do that. And I would say Simon specifically was a great encourager of us to sort of step outside of the path of the experience that you have, and to think about experience more broadly. So you don't have to be an expert in a thing in order to sort of take on leadership of that, right? But leadership is about having the right people there. It may be you as the leader and others as the experts, but to be able to kind of help them do their best job and for you to keep learning. And so it gave me a lot of courage to kind of start to learn about things that I didn't know, and to take on responsibilities that maybe weren't squarely in my experience, my professional experience or training, but to have the courage to do so. And that really led to probably the next step of my career. Is I left BMO to become the general counsel of another Canadian bank, Canadian Western Bank, a much smaller organization, but one that wanted transformation. And I felt like I was maybe ready for the big shoes, right? And to be the general counsel. And Simon's, I was scared to death to tell him, by the way, when I was leaving, but his comment to me was, good for you. Like, I'm really proud of you. You've done work here, and I'm excited to see what you do. And that was a huge ringing endorsement for me. There was no, why are you leaving? What's the matter with it? Like, it was all about being excited about what could be ahead for me and encouraging me to, lean into the opportunity to build, to transform. And that means a lot, right? It's that sort of encouragement to be courageous. So I took on a role that I did not know, that I was not qualified for entirely. But I remember talking to the chief financial officer at the time that my role reported into her, and her being a CFO is an unusual experience. But as we were chatting, and I pointed to the job description, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never been a corporate secretary. I've never done this. I've never done that. And she just sort of stopped me, and she was like, there are things on your resume that I don't even know like what they are or that they existed. So I'm sure you'll figure this out. And that kind of, I'm sure you'll figure this out and be great, was again another sort of form of encouragement. So again, for me, I've been lucky enough to have some of this sponsorship and this mentorship come from my leaders, but sometimes you have to ask for it from them. Simon wasn't about to kind of stroke my ego at every turn. There were lots of times where we had conversations where I felt like I needed some positive reinforcement and I had to ask for it, and that's okay. And then the same thing in subsequent roles. But it's, I think sometimes having a little bit of a push, a little bit of a support of, and taking the leap. I had a coach one time who said to me, a professional coach, who said to me, like, what exactly have you ever failed at in your life? Like, why are you so focused on this next step being the thing that you're going to fail at? And I was like, I guess maybe because even if it didn't work out, it didn't mean I failed. It just meant that maybe it wasn't the right thing at the right time. So as you can hear, I have lots of people, and I intentionally like to have a lot of people in my life who support me along the way. Kate, you're one of them. I've had many conversations with you over time about what about this and that, and I'm freaked out about this, or I'm nervous about that. And I think having your sort of group of people around you, whether be they your bosses, be friends, just be people that you kind of know in the world that you intersect with in different places. For me, I learn a lot through the experience. It's not just reading books for me. And so having those folks around me to sometimes help me see things through a different lens or a different light is really important.
Well, first thing I'll say is right back at you, Bindu. It's a privilege, and goodness knows, I've benefited from you in my circle as well over the years, and I think that those circles really matter. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to get our audience involved now, so I'm going to pause the conversation for a moment, and turn it to Romana, who is either I don't know what she's doing, DJing or landing airplanes with her headset on there, but we're going to ask her to get our audience engaged, and we're going to do our first poll. So wake up, audience. Not that I think you were sleeping, because this has been such a great conversation so far, but this is the interactive part. So over to you, Romana.
Thanks, Kate. Yes, this is part of my brand.
Is everyone hearing feedback?
Can you hear feedback? Maybe just turn off the volume on your computer. We're in the same room, in the same conference room. But let me launch this poll. I think that worked. We want to ask you all about kind of your career steps, how you're feeling about your own career. So you should be seeing the poll on your screens. And the question's asking, when it comes to career progression, which of the following best describes where you are in your career? So the answers are, I'm already where I need to be. The second one is, I feel I have everything I need to progress my career. The third one is, I feel I need a bit more mentoring. Fourth is, I need to have more technical experience before I can really progress. And the last one is, I don't really know where to start. These are all valid feelings, all valid reflection points, which I'm sure it's all, when we think about career progression, it's all kind of on a spectrum, right? We might at sometimes feel like we've got it in the bag, and at other points we might feel very low, and that, we don't know what that next step is going to hold. And I think, Bindu, you really you spoke about that really, really eloquently. So about 70% of you have voted. Maybe I'll give it another second or two for those remaining stragglers to put their vote in on how they're feeling. I see the numbers bumping up just a little bit. So I'll end the poll in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm ending the poll and I'm sharing the results. So you should be seeing the results on your screen now. So all of our colleagues here on this virtual room today, we have a varying degree of feelings about where we currently are in our career development or in our career progression. But almost 60% of you said, you know what, I feel like I need more mentoring. So, I think that was great, Kate and Bindu, that you were talking about that mentoring piece. And maybe as we move on in the session, we can elaborate on that a little bit more and pull some other pieces, Bindu, from your vast experience about that. So I'll stop sharing just now. Thank you all for interacting with us, and I'll hand it back over to Kate.
And I will try to do both things, turn my sound back on and unmute myself. Can I be heard?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Excellent. Apologies, people, for any of the ear noise there, but we'll figure it out for the next time. So I think that's the response from our audience around mentoring, it's so consistent with what the research tells us, with what people consistently say. I think our numbers are a little bit low. I was reading, I love LinkedIn. It is such a great source of information. And it recently, I was reading about a survey that 75% of people said they really felt they needed mentoring, and only about 54% of people felt that they were getting it. But maybe you can, we started talking about this a bit, Bindu, but maybe we can talk about it more. I know there, maybe there, what would you suggest? I think there are really creative ways that people can look for mentoring. We talked about, mentor doesn't necessarily always have to be somebody senior who's bringing you along. They can be peers. I know I've relied on those things, but I'd really love to hear about, I'm sure our audience would love to hear about your experience or thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So the older I get, the more I realize the mentoring, it comes from all the people in my life. Like, the younger folks earlier in their career, my children, they're constantly offering me feedback about things. But also people who are, maybe further along in their career, maybe further along in their life. I think the thing with mentoring is it doesn't just come to you. Like, don't live in this place where you think you're entitled to receive a mentor and receive mentoring, and that it will be done for you. Sometimes people are going to give you feedback, coaching, mentoring, or whatnot that doesn't make sense for you. That doesn't align with who you are. It doesn't have value for you. And you don't have to take everyone's feedback, right? You can receive it. You don't have to take it in. And I will say over the course of my career, I've probably received some mentoring or feedback that didn't ring true for me. It didn't make sense for me. And I think you have to have the courage to kind of choose who you listen to, and sometimes seek out people that you want to listen to, that you want to know. And I think maybe the mentors that you have, some of them might be for your entire life, right? But some of them might be for moments in your life. And maybe you need that mentoring from somebody who doesn't know you very well. Who maybe doesn't know the organization that you're in, if you are in an organization. I haven't always had mentors in my own organization, my own law firm or my own company, because sometimes you get sort of stuck in a cycle of like the culture of that place and the limitation of what or the limits that might be in that place. And so I think it's important to make sure you have a breadth of different people from different points in their life, at different moments, different careers, different trajectories. And I find my mentors are shifting a little bit over time as I'm sort of thinking about what, I hope is the latter half of my career. But who do I want to talk to about that? And what are potential next steps? So yeah, I would say, I think cultivating a broad network is useful, or at least that gives me energy. I mean, I appreciate that I, am on the spectrum of like extroversion, and I really do get energy from talking to other people and learning from their experiences. And that's not going to be everybody's experience. So find people that seem interesting to you that can offer you some insights, maybe to see you in a different way than you might see yourself, who could offer you, the point of their experience, or their vision or view, and take it or leave it, right? It's not mandatory for you to try to incorporate every bit of feedback that you get from every point of your life. I'd say there's a really great opportunity, particularly, I think, in the in-house world, but I think amongst women specifically, and this is a great forum, right? Like, reach into places and find community of people with some similar interests or common interests. I've had the great, privilege of being parts of lots of different legal communities in terms of minority bar associations and in-house associations and general counsel networks. And I learned so much from that. And I hope I can contribute to those as well. But again, we're not all the same. Sometimes I go to these sessions or I'm part of conversations and I'm like, that's not my experience, or that's not what's, resonates with me. But I'm curious as to why, like, tell me more about your experience, or tell me why you think that that's, a perspective. And I take those in, right? I listen to them, but I don't necessarily absorb them and follow them. But I think hearing from different people's experiences are really important and can give you some insights. And I will say sometimes there was advice that I received or mentoring that I received like years ago that becomes relevant because of a circumstance or a time. And so, I think it's kind of lifelong learning and approaching all of these connections with curiosity, but not an expectation that they owe this to me or that it will make my life better or it will lead to a promotion or it will lead to this. I think has to be your responsibility, that you can take input from others. And sometimes your ambitions will be foiled. So then you need to figure out whether or not you're in the right place, working with the right people. And you've got to make choices for yourself. We have great privilege in being lawyers, right? That we can often have the financial resources and perhaps the professional confidence to change our locations when we need to. So I think mentorship and coaching and advice and sponsorship, those are all part of the trajectory, but they can't be all of it. You have to invest in yourself and figuring out what you want.
I love that. Thanks for that. And I love that comment because I've certainly had that experience, and perhaps those of us who have been around a little bit longer on this call will have it too. Those moments of advice or comments or things that have been shared by mentors and in the moment, they don't make sense or they don't resonate. And sometimes it can literally be years later you're going, oh, now I get that, why that matters and what it means. So I like that idea of kind of, sometimes maybe you just need to kind of put it in your back pocket because it might not have meaning now, but it could be a very important nugget or kernel that later on is valuable. Now, I want to, if I can, shift gears. I don't know if it's really a shifting of gears, but you did talk about early on, when you're talking about your kind of moves around and different jobs that you were doing and what you could in-house, really this desire for maybe a greater breadth of what you're doing in your role. And you talked a little bit about, some of the jobs you had at BMO and your CAO role and so on. But now you have this title in your current role, and we can absolutely talk about the path there. But it includes Chief Inclusion and Equity Officer, which I know is newer. But this isn't new to you. The investment in inclusion, diversity, and equity is something that's been ongoing. A big part of your career trajectory and journey. I'm going to probably say since the beginning, but I didn't know you from the beginning, but certainly as long as I've known you, which is a long time. Yeah. And you talked about, I'm going to frame it this way. People will readily talk about inclusion, diversity, and equity as a passion. They talk less often about it as a job.
Right.
If I can put it in those terms. And obviously it's now my job. It's obviously also your job or part of your job. I'd love it if you might comment about the importance of inclusion, diversity, and equity as part of the organizational construct and a formalized role and job responsibility. I just love to hear your reflections on that, because I do think there's probably a lot of these people on this call who are really invested in it as a passion, but maybe aren't in a place where it's really kind of transcended passion into organizational construct or role.
Absolutely. This is a new piece to my role, and the title is quite ridiculous. There's a lot of words in my title. But I thought it was really also important to put it in the title because it's interesting that, I think there was a long time, and again, I'm old enough and have been practicing long enough and working for long enough to appreciate that there's been a progression about how we think about the value of having a diverse workforce. That maybe there was a resistance in the beginning because it felt like you were just, trying to collect all the different Barbie dolls or, sorry, I'm just going to hang up on a call. It's coming in. Apparently I'm still at work. And so I think the shift over time, right, to talking about this as the opportunity to have all of our workforce feel included and participate and engage And then to the move to really talking about what does that mean in terms of creating equity within our workforces, within our environments. To me, that all leads to law, right? Like at the end of the day, equity is a legal concept, and having equitable outcomes. If we don't have equity within our organization, it creates legal risk. And if we don't, sort of do things consistently and with fairness, again, that also creates some legal risk. And so for me, this passion that I've had over the years, a lot from my personal experience and my lived experience, right, of often being the one and the only, is, one that like I've had to kind of get more comfortable with. And frankly, the more senior I've gotten, the more I've had a point of view and a perspective to share, and have felt comfortable, have felt like I'm included in my environments and feel like I can state my point of view or share my experiences or call out or call on others to share their experience. I don't want to talk about calling out somebody, but doing that, has felt increasingly like an obligation, but like a positive responsibility for me. And so I think what I've had as an opportunity at my latest bank, which is Laurentian Bank of Canada, is the opportunity to bring kind of the way we have to help address legal risk and compliance risk and things like that of the bank, which are serious, must-dos, but to combine that with that lens around like, how do we make sure we are creating an equitable workplace, and how are we making sure that it's inclusive and that we're driving practices that create those conditions. But they're not all in my world. So I don't have all of the hiring managers reporting to me. I don't have all of the HR functions that exist in bigger organizations to do so. It's really a role of like influencing those people for whom parts of their jobs are to help attract talent to the organization, help support, leaders hiring, leaders assessing performance, leaders making promotions and that sort of thing, but to bring that lens. And I sort of feel like it's the same thing that one does with legal, right? I don't have legal radar. There's very rare opportunities where I get to stop or I have the veto power or the authority to tell somebody to stop doing something, because thankfully I work in organizations that, sort of follow the letter of the law, right? So my job is to influence and say, well, have we thought about it from this lens? And so I feel like there's this great opportunity to combine legal with EDI or IDE or whatever we want to call it, but a little bit more on the focus of the equity piece. Like, this is not just a nice to have. This is not just about having happy employees, but actually doing what's right for our employees, which is to create equitable conditions. And sometimes equity means we have to do things to prefer one group over another for a particular reason. And sometimes that's hard. And I find having the combined role of Chief Legal Officer and this Chief Inclusion and Equity Officer is one where I think what this approach is sort of takes on a little bit more. It has a little bit more, it has momentum to it, maybe not a little bit more, but momentum to it, because it's not just a nice to have or a soft thing. It's like your CLO is telling you should really think about how you're doing this recruiting. So for me, it's been like, honestly, the opportunity of a lifetime. Like, I am so excited by the work that I get to do here in this space, and to do it for across our organization, and not just in the legal sector, which is where I've spent a lot of my time, talking about these issues and doing work in this space, but rather to do it for across our organization, and appreciate that diversity in places is really different. Like, if, one of the things we've done is to set representation goals amongst all of the executive VPs. But all of us have different goals. Like, in some groups, it's actually about, promoting more men into roles. If we really want to think about a representative workforce that reflects the communities that we work in. In some, it's not about sort of racialized persons or women. It's about others. And so it's like, let's look at the workforces that we have. Let's look at the specific challenges that we have and really think about them. This is not just about preferring one group over everybody else, but rather like, how do we make sure we have a representative workforce that sort of meets the goals that we have, right, around, serving our customers, creating a great workplace for people they want to be, where they feel like they have opportunities to grow and progress, and bringing all of those different perspectives to the work that we do. So it's been a lot of fun and really eye-opening for me. I've learned a lot since coming to this bank, since getting to take on this role, and it's a great privilege.
Thanks for that. Well, I'll just say to our chief legal officer at Dentons, don't worry, I'm not coming for your job. He's brilliant at it. He can stay there, but I do think it's great to hear that intersection, because we do talk about that, about the role of lawyers and all of us in the legal profession, and what that means in this space when we talk about issues of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And I know our audience always loves it when I share data points, and I'm going to try to shorthand it. And if anybody wants the details, that we can share them after the fact. I don't have a slide and so on, but I'll just share some really interesting data points recently about organizations that have DEI leaders. They use DEI in this case, so diversity, equity, inclusion leaders in place, and how those organizations rank and fare when it comes to what I'll call standard business performance indicators. And I think it's really fascinating, because what this study revealed when they were looking at corporate effectiveness is that organizations who had a person, so we can say any person who carried a DEI title, consistently outperformed organizations that didn't. And the more senior that DEI title was, and particularly organizations that had a diversity executive in the C-suite, like you, Bindu, they were consistently outperforming, and by increasingly significant margins, right? Greater seniority of that DEI leader on pretty much every single effectiveness, corporate effectiveness elements. So customer satisfaction, employee engagement, innovation, social responsibility, and financial strength. They were consistently outperforming when there was, no DEI person in place. And I think I think that speaks volumes. I'm gonna ask you one last question in this spot, and we're gonna have to keep moving it, but because we're going to run out of time. And I'll just say to our audience, look, if you have questions for Bindu, we do want to give an opportunity for us to put your questions to Bindu. So if you do put them in the chat, if you just want to listen to us yak on, which you probably have figured out, Bindu and I for days. Yep. Yeah, that's okay too. But you've really taken some leadership roles, and there's one in particular given our audience or today in the Canadian context, but I think people broadly around the world might want to hear about this as well, which is the Women General Council Canada organization, initiative, group that has been around a while, and that you're really heavily involved in. But I think you guys are doing some really innovative things with your General Counsel University. And can you just talk to the group a little bit about that? It might spark an idea for some audience members about things that they might be able to do as well with others to really advance the cause of women.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. So Women General Counsel Canada was very grassroots. It kind of organically sprouted up amongst a number of women GCs. I'd say, maybe started with some friends, and then it kind of expanded, and you sort of say, hey, we're getting together and we want to talk about this, or we're doing this. And the organization sort of kept growing. And so it's very much, I guess an association of sorts, where we are often talking about the issues that are relevant when you're at the intersection of law and, being a senior woman in law, right? So it is kind of focused on, those who are general counsels or almost near general counsels, or perhaps onto their career after being a general counsel. So it's a place of community. It's a place of networking. But one of the things we wanted to do was also to have this be like kind of a bespoke opportunity of learning. And so about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't know, sometime during the pandemic, I don't know when that was, we had worked with one of the recruiting firms to sort of dig into, what were the competencies of the most successful, the most sought after general counsel. So this recruiting firm does this globally, and they have all this data from these assessments that they would do. And it would be, sort of what are the most, like the highest performing general counsels, like what do they do, or what are their competencies? And so this is not a focus on your legal skills. This is not about how much law you know or what jurisdiction you do, but rather your leadership, right? Because as a general counsel, some general counsels are doing like a lot of legal work. That is not me. It's more about leadership. And so this survey identified 12 competencies out of this 40 competency framework that they had were the ones that were most present with the most sought after GCs. So we took that data because we had asked them to sort of pull it together for us, and we built a university program, 40 hours of learning that was really focused on how do you develop these competencies, like what do these competencies look like for women general counsel, and how do you develop them? So not substantive, not interested in the latest cases or whatever, but really focus on kind of a personal growth journey. And it was an incredible opportunity for me to be asked to sort of put this together. And I did so with a good friend who was also a very seasoned GC. And it was so fun. Like we were able to design a program that I wanted to take. And I took it. I was in the inaugural cohort. And to come together with another group of women, like a group of women who are all interested in kind of exploring and learning in this way, and to do so together, it creates that kind of community that I talk about as being so important for mentoring. Our cohort did this 2.5, 3 years ago, and we're still super connected. We live across Canada, and we have very different jobs, and we're at different places in our lives, but it's just really been a beautiful way to network. And I would say that this is kind of a program that one could, sort of leverage and use the same kinds of ideas wherever you are, right? And it doesn't have to be as formal as it was, where we had a curriculum and, we brought in lots of great partners to the association who provided us with some content. But I'd say the content was just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like the real value of this commitment to each other to come together through this program and spend this 40 hours together over, sort of 4 months, was about how engaged we were and what we put into that. And you don't need a fancy formal program to do so. And if anybody's interested anywhere about this, I'm super happy to talk about how we did it, because one of the things I like to do is to keep it simple and to build on great things that are already out there, and to sort of put them together. And I'd be really, really happy to talk about that with anybody who's interested. But it was a real privilege to get to build it, and then and just a real joy to be able to be part of it. And it continues on. We're in our fourth cohorts this year, and so we've just got more and more alumni out of the program, and it's pretty exciting.
Thanks for that. And it's such a great program. We have a question that's come in, and I think this might actually be, Bindu, we agreed when we started this, we're going to probably wander off our script. So that's totally fine. So I think this is a great question. So I'll put it to you now, if you don't mind. The question is, how have you heard about new work opportunities? Has it been through recruiters, networking, or word of mouth? I think it's a great question. I think everybody has that question.
Yeah. So I would say my move from one law firm to another law firm was, in my personal experience, was a referral, because I had worked with that other law firm, and some of the lawyers there were like, we really like you. So remember that every day that you are doing your job, you're also auditioning for future jobs. Not that we're encouraging anybody from Dentons to go to another law firm, just saying. But I think it's important for you to remember that everywhere you go and whatever you're doing, people are making an assessment of you, right? And, are you the kind of person that they want to work with, that they want to be with, that they want to spend time with? My move from private practice to in-house was because I had friends who were in-house, and they happened to know of sort of an open role that happened there. And I very boldly emailed the hiring manager and said, I'm really interested in joining. Turns out that all worked itself out. So there was an interview process with other candidates and got that job. A lot of the moves I had, internally were ones that kind of came up. There weren't actually application processes for any of those things. So at some point, it was like I was kind of moved into those positions of leadership. And I know that can feel unfair to people because people like to be able to put their hands up. It was how things were done there. And I think about that actually as I go to create opportunities in my own teams for leadership and what that means around fairness and how it allows for people to express their intentions or otherwise. So I have learned from being the beneficiary of those things, but also hearing from a lot of people along the way that didn't always feel great. My move to become the general counsel was through a recruiter. And that was interesting. And it caused me to sort of appreciate that as I was moving in my career, different recruiters have served different purposes. So as I was moving towards the C-suite, they were different recruiters than the ones that I used to work with or would pay more attention to or knew or followed when I was, in private practice or earlier in my career. And then really the move to Laurentian was very much driven by a relationship that I had with a former client. So from 20 years earlier, and she was the then new CEO of this bank. And we, had been chatting over time. They ran a small contest, and I threw my, hat in the ring, so to speak, and got to have this wonderful opportunity to join Laurentian Bank and bring my experience to it. And I think for me, again, all through all that time, I'm lucky enough to get reach outs from recruiters. I always, try to take the calls, even if it's not the role that I want. So I'm not prepared to get married at the first phone call. So just so you know, you can take calls from people and not have to date them or marry them. But, to sort of get to know them and to hear how they're positioning these roles. And I also learn a lot from those. There are information interviews for me sometimes too, right? It's also an opportunity for me to tell my story. Because I will say, as you move outside of the legal recruiters, most professional recruiters, like the executive recruiters, they don't always know what lawyers do, right? And they have a very sometimes narrow idea of what a lawyer's skill sets are, right? I'd say sometimes my colleagues have the same view. And so I think it's important for you to be ready to tell your story. What do you bring to the table? Like what interests you, what drives you, what motivates you? And I think that's a really good investment of time. And maybe you take a few of those meetings to refine your message, to hear what it is. And maybe it's sometimes you're looking for postings, right? To sort of reach out to somebody and connect. And sometimes they won't connect, and don't take it personally, just like in all relationship things, not everybody's gonna connect. But I think, so I'd say throughout my career, it's been a bit of like, who have I been and how have I showed up and how have other people received that? And sometimes it is like, oh, your resume is quite, looks good on LinkedIn. We're kind of interested in talking to you. But I also get a lot of reach outs for jobs where I'm like, I know I'm a lawyer, but I really have no idea what that business is or that area of law is. And so sometimes they're kind of amusing. Apparently to some recruiters, general counsel means like really junior counsel, like you don't know anything, like you're just a generalist. And I was like, oh, okay. So I don't usually spend a lot of time on those reach outs.
Gotcha. I love
but
that.
I don't mean to sound arrogant.
No.
I'm just, yeah.
I love that part that, and we talk about it a lot. What's the worst thing somebody's going to say? No. And, when you made that initial outreach to the recruiter at Bank of Montreal, they might have said no.
Exactly.
And that, being a little resilient around those things is valuable. So well done on that. But we talked about women general counsel, and I want to make sure we cover a topic. And again, if there are more questions, please throw them in. But Bindu and I are just going to keep otherwise plowing ahead. I want to talk about leadership. You talked about women general counsel and focusing on leadership skills and development. But you just talked about sometimes, people think in the recruiting context that this job is something that you don't think it is necessarily. It's very narrow, maybe very technical. And, I know for you sit at the executive table in the organization. Obviously, you're there to, I'll say, represent legal. You're there to represent inclusion and equity. You're there to perform, I'll say, a more technical role as the corporate secretary of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, can you talk a little bit about the skills and the leadership elements that go into being in that role? You're talking about lawyers being more than just a lawyer.
So I'd say, I think this is where I think you as an individual have to think about the value, but the places you want to play and the value that you think you can bring. So yes, I'm technically a lawyer, but I'm going to tell you this, some of the technical stuff that we're advising on, I don't practice in that area. I was a lending lawyer, so I don't do securities. Don't do litigation. I don't do all of these things. That's not in my wheelhouse. So what is my job there? It is to really manage legal risk across all sectors. But legal risk doesn't exist as a separate silo, right? It's integrated into, certain behaviors create legal risk, certain non-behaviors can create legal risk. But there's going to be a certain amount of risk that one has to take, because every business is in the business of taking some risk, right? So I want to be part of the conversation, and not just to force myself onto it. I don't want for legal to be, kind of a toll gate on the route to happiness, where oftentimes our business colleagues will think about us as, sort of the people who kill all the joy in the room. But, so I want to be there from the beginning. And how do we get to be there from the beginning? It's by actually treating, I think, our colleagues as colleagues. They're not our clients. We're not giving them perfect answers in a memo and throwing it over the wall at them and hoping that they know what the hell to do with it. And then wiping our hands of it and shaking our heads when they didn't follow our advice. Our jobs are to be persuasive. Our jobs are to influence. And I think when we're at our best, that's what we do. So it means sometimes sitting at the table and really trying to persuade somebody that this is the way to go. I think it's easier for the seat that I get to have at the executive table to be able to influence those conversations, to get involved earlier. And I think, and it has, I think, been the experience of teams like that. You do have a seat at the table, or you at least to get invited to the table, but nobody's going to invite you back over to dinner if you're a terrible guest, right? So you've got to, what's the value you add? And if the only thing you can ever talk about is section blah, 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 of whatever statute, like no one really wants to talk to you. Like, I don't want to talk to you. That's boring. So where can you add some other value? Like, you're a human, you're a consumer, you're a person who would see this through the lens of, I happen to have always worked at banks, which means I've always been a consumer of those banks. I've always been a customer of those banks. So what's my experience as a customer, not just the lawyer, but rather, how do I bring that lens? So I think that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it is, like, I've got technical knowledge, or my team has technical knowledge to bring to it, but we also have a lot of views around governance. And I would say, one thing I've learned over my legal career is sometimes you might get the answer wrong, but it's the process that you use to get there. And so do we have a good process? Do we have, a process that's defendable for us to do? And that's governance, right? And I think lawyers inherently understand governance. But I would say having the opportunity to learn the corporate secretary role really broadened my mind to kind of think about how I can help governance happen at the organization, across the organization. So even if it's policies about something that are in somebody else's domain, I still have a lens and a view, and I think something to offer around, well, how do we govern that properly? How do we have the controls that we need to sort of manage that risk? And how do we report on it? Because of course, reporting is a piece that feeds into what the board needs to know, what senior management needs to know. And then I think the last piece around why I think the EDI space works is, I've always had a personal experience and a lived experience that, as I've gotten more and more senior, have been much more comfortable to put on the table. And I will fully acknowledge that when I was a baby lawyer back in the olden days, I was actually hoping nobody noticed I was different, right? I was trying to assimilate, I was trying to fit in, but turns out I never really did, because I really didn't look like a lot of the other people around the table. and I usually had too much to say. So at some point I became much more comfortable about going, well, you're going to notice I'm different. So how can I use that as an opportunity to have a conversation so that I'm not defensive, but that this could be a place of learning and curiosity. And I find, again, my personal experience as a woman of color, but also as a lawyer, right, are relevant to some of those conversations. I'm bringing a lot of different experiences. I also appreciate in the role that I have now at the company that I have now, the fact that I don't live in the city, like the main city of the bank, is also really relevant. So I'm bringing a geographic piece to it, and I'm bringing the professional experiences that I have. So, I would say for lawyers who are really wanting to pursue more and more senior leaders, what got you here is not gonna get you there, right? So your technical expertise is table stakes. And I've had some coaches tell me this. Nobody's questioning your legal abilities. They want to see how those translate into making this relevant for them, to help them manage through their client issues, their product development things. That's what they need from you as you keep kind of moving. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of lawyers get very stuck in wanting they want an entitlement to sit at the table, and you can have that, but whether you get invited to after dinner drinks or get invited back to dinner is going to be about how you can help people feel okay, right, about the advice that you give them and trust you to want to give you that advice. And you're not going to be BFFs with best friends with everybody, but to create a culture around a reputation around yourself as being somebody who's good at problem solving, who helps, protect the organization or protect them even around having a good thought process about what they do and doing things with sort of a knowledge of the risk that they're taking on. I think that's quite universal and quite translatable. And frankly, it's a hell of a lot more fun. I don't really want to talk about sections of a statute all the time. So, again, it's more fun for me to get into the why are we doing this, and who's the clients, and what are the opportunities, and what are we stumbling on, and maybe I can clear some of those obstacles because I'm willing to take the risk, or I'm willing to kind of drive us towards considering taking a particular risk in order to get there. And I just want to say one last thing, and it was great advice that I received from a business leader years and years ago. And she was like, hey, lawyers, what if this worked? What if this thing that the business wants to do, and this more in the context of in-house, what if it was successful? Instead of just immediately crapping all over whatever ideas we have, what if you were enthusiastic about it? And that really shifted my mindset. Because boy, oh boy, do I ever take in feedback better when it starts with a compliment, or it starts with that sounds really cool, or that's really great, Bindu, and here's what I think you could do to make this better. That feels really different than, sorry, there's a major legal risk associated with whatever it is that you're doing, and crossing your arms and sitting back and waiting for them to, I don't know, do what. So I think some of it's about your attitude and how you present.
Oh, so now it's my turn for my phone to ring in the background. Sorry about that. I don't know if everyone could hear that. Bindu, this was unbelievable. And believe it or not, we are at the top of the hour. I feel like we're going to have Wow, Bindu Cudjoe, the sequel or something. I know we could go on for days and days. For those of you who've hung in with us, because as we've done exactly what we said we wouldn't do, which is hit the top of the hour. Neve has put into the chat, we ask you, please send us your feedback. Let us know how you felt about today's session. We loved having you. We loved having you, Bindu. We loved having all of you join us. And thank you, Bindu. Thank you so much. I've learned things. I thought I knew you, but I've learned things today. So our eternal gratitude. And
Thank you.
And with that, Neve, is there anything else I need to say, or
no, you've done a brilliant job, Kate.
Terrific.
So no, just a huge thanks to you both and Romana for a fab session, and thanks to everyone for joining. That concludes today's session.